Good evening. Welcome. My name is Joy Armstrong. I'm the director and curator of the Galleries of Contemporary Art, and I am so excited to welcome you to this evening's Visiting Artist and Critics series, also known as VAX, featuring artist Jenny Irene Miller. We have the pleasure of hosting Jenny as our F.E.A.R.S resident this week, and their exhibition On This Sand Together opens in the project space tomorrow evening with a reception from 5 to 7 p.m. and will run through November 30th. So I hope you will all return tomorrow evening, as we'll have the artist with us again and we'll get to see the work that you'll start to hear a little bit about this evening. The F.E.A.R.S program began in 2018, founded by VAPA faculty member Corey Dryeth and former faculty Dr. Catherine Guinness. Jenny is the sixth, correct me if I'm wrong, sixth F.E.A.R.S artist. I'm getting a nod, yes. And GOCA would like to thank very much VAPA for this collaborative project. We would also like to thank our GOCA season sponsors, the El Pomar Foundation, the Janine K. Sheehy Memorial Fund, and the generous members of our Curators Circle. GOCA fundraises for 100% of our program and exhibition costs, and the financial support from these amazing individuals help make it possible. Please join me in thanking VAPA as well as our GOCA sponsors. So now to the good part. Jenny Irene Miller is based out of Anchorage, Alaska, and they are an artist who uses photography as well as video, sound, and sculpture to tell stories, recall people and memories, and engage research into works that interrogate and reimagine a colonial past. They describe their work as quiet, allowing them to understand their knowledge of self and the ways of knowing instilled in them by family, Inupiaq, culture, and experience. By centering a contemporary interdisciplinary artistic approach, they are defining the many possibilities of Indigenous futures, ones that celebrate kinship, place, joy, humor, queerness, protection, and refusal. Please join me in welcoming our visiting artist, Jenny Irene Miller.
Hi, everyone. You got a little snapshot of what I will be speaking out about from Joy, so I might be a little repetitive in some of that. But hi, everyone. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. I also want to give a big thank you to Corey, Lene, Joy, Margaret, Stacy, and the team here at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, who have made my artist residency possible, have spent time with me, and have installed my work. I'm on day 3, and I'm already feeling very welcomed and supported. As Joy had shared, my name is Jenny. I'm an artist who primarily works with the medium of photography. My larger portfolio also includes works made with video, sound, and sculpture. My art practice is grounded in all of this: place, community, the familial archive, memory, and place. The poetics found in what is seen or refused in my images make important contributions to my work. Today's talk will include an overview of a selection of past works and in-progress work, and an introduction to who I am and where I come from. The circumpolar region is what we Inuit call home. We continue to live in our homelands in the empires of the United States, in Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Russia, and beyond. So if you see the red section, that's the Inuit circumpolar region of Alaska. And here's a zoomed in view. So if you look at the map on the right, you can see the larger state, and then the left is a zoomed in view of the Seward Peninsula, and the bottom left is Nome. I'm from Nome, and I come from the Inupiaq of Northwest Alaska. And then a little bit up from there is Kinnigan, Wales, Alaska, where my maternal family roots are from. This map illustrates the many Indigenous place names that the previous map does not include. This region was and is still home to many unique Alaska Native peoples. I like to start all of my talks with a recognition of place and where I come from. Place plays an important role in who I am and what my work is about. If I could boil down my work to one word, it would be home. Home is made up of community, family, non-human kin, and so much more. It's important for me to ground my viewers and audience in where I come from, so perhaps those viewers who are not part of my culture may look at my work with a more informed perspective to critically analyze the work. I see my work as a form of visual sovereignty. Visual sovereignty, as Dr. Jolene Rickard says, and I quote, is one of the most dominant expressions of self-determination. Just as my Inupiaq ancestors' identities were formed, my identity is shaped by the lands and the waters that we come from. I am Kingikmut, which translates to the people of Kinnigan. Who I am is formed by my relations to kin, to the land, to the ocean, my family, the community I come from, and those who I love. This photograph is an image I made during my first visit to Kinnigan, the village of my maternal family roots. It is about 109 miles northwest of Nome, and both Kinnigan and Nome are only accessible by air or ocean. My fascination with the photograph began at a young age. In 1994, at the age of 6, after my great-grandma passed away, I inherited her Polaroid camera. This was when I began to form a strong interest in looking at photographs and making snapshot images of the people and places in my life, as well as the mundane activities I deemed important as a child. It was around this time that my enchantment with our family's archive also began. I see photography as a magic medium. Photography as a medium still has that magical quality to it that draws me in and allows me to spend more time with a particular subject, theme, or memory. Photography provides a space for me to practice a form of careful observation that runs deep in the Inupiaq culture I come from. So these images here are what I would consider my first self-portraits from 1996 with the help of my brother, who I directed to click the shutter. And it's a silly story of taking a bath and getting ready for bed, images made by kids. The next slides contain a selection of work I made during my last couple of years of undergraduate studies at the University of Washington. This work is called The Duwamish River and was made in 2011 on the lands and waters of the Duwamish people, the original peoples of Seattle. As an Inupiaq person, I come from water peoples. So everywhere I look, I'm looking for the water, observing the water, and trying to learn more about it. It's a way for me to form a connection to place. These images portray the natural yet urban environment, industry, and restoration areas of the river and snippets of the surrounding communities. While living in Seattle, I was learning more about the Duwamish River and first came to know this river by following it from the headwaters in the mountains to the tidewaters. At that time, I only used public transportation and my 1980s trek bike to get around, so I couldn't travel again to the headwaters after that initial visit, but I was still very curious about this river. I then decided to spend more time at the tidewaters of the Duwamish River in West Seattle and make images there as well as on the river. Today, the Duwamish River is much different than what it used to be. The once meandering river was altered and straightened in 1913 by the Army Corps of Engineers. The natural channels were modified for a deeper, straighter body of water to enable ships to steer through, allowing industry to drastically change this river. In 2001, the Duwamish River was listed as a federal Superfund site. The images are slightly darker on the projection. A conversation with me in Inupiaq from 2013 comments on language suppression through external forces organized by the US federal government, such as missionaries, boarding schools, and other assimilation tactics. In this video, I remain silent because I cannot speak my language. It's also made in a church, as Christianity has played a large role in the suppression of our language. Language still plays a role in the work I am making today, through titles or thinking about the visual language of photography, or my attempts to include my own voice through handwriting, which we will see later. That's Not Quack, How Did We Get Here is a 3-channel video. When making this piece, I was interested in food sovereignty and how our Inupiaq identity is tied to our foods, to the lands and the waters our foods come from. Around this time, I was thinking about my relationship to traditional foods such as muktuk, seal, and other forms of quack, and how I wasn't able to access the food when I was away from my home community, and how my tastes were changing as I moved further and further away from Northwest Alaska. This video is also the first piece where I began to experiment with visual cues that perhaps many Inupiaq people would recognize and relate to. That is the dull and mass-produced ulu my cousin cuts the chicken with, and the cardboard she cuts the chicken on. Cardboard, which we use back home to cut our traditional foods on, which are often sea mammals, can be too large for a normal cutting board, and the sea mammals have strong scents. Therefore, cardboard provides a cutting board that can easily be disposed of. This is also the first time I began to experiment with the concept of learning through observation, which is culturally significant. As Inupiaq, we are taught to learn from watching, learn by doing. Taking this customary act of learning through observation, my cousin Andy Faye, who is also Inupiaq, viewed a video on YouTube on how to cut a chicken. She then portioned out the whole $6.99 rotisserie chicken for us to eat using a mass-produced ulu not made by our peoples, a mimic of a traditional Inuit knife. That's Not Quack, How Did We Get Here comments on the switch from nutrient-rich traditional foods to easy to access store-bought foods. Our traditional foods are important to our culture and our identity. Food defines who we are and connects us to our ancestors. So how did we get here? Mom before her last chemo treatment. These are the last images I got to make with my mom prior to leaving Alaska for grad school in 2019. Over the years, and I will say my mom is cancer-free today, and we look back at these images as being visual references of strength and what she has overcome. So over the years, and really since high school, I've always made photographs of my mom. This session was especially tender and hard. It was tough to leave Alaska knowing my mom was going through chemotherapy and had an aggressive form of cancer. This was all while my partner and I and our dog made our drive from Anchorage to Albuquerque. Being new to Albuquerque and far from home, and not initially having a community there, caused me to think hard, and it took me a while to make work that became something. So I began to think about how to bring stories from home forward in new work while not having immediate access to home or community. This caused me to explore other modes of making, such as sculpture. My Grammy's dialect from 2019 to 2020 is a small-scale sculpture carved from ivory brand soap in the form of a human tongue that comes out of the wall at roughly the height my late grandma was when she was abused in school for speaking her language. While I was in elementary school, Inupiaq master carvers were invited to our school to teach us about the medium of walrus tusk carving. Because ivory soap is much more affordable and accessible than walrus ivory, we were taught to carve soap to mimic the tradition of ivory carving. My Grammy's dialect references one means by which the Inupiaq language has been suppressed in Inupiaq communities, as well as other Indigenous communities, through the washing of one's mouth with soap for speaking their dialect. Thinking about language and having conversations with kin who have passed through my work continues to come forward. This image, looking for my language in the corner where my Grammy was forced to leave it, was made in 2019. I was never satisfied with this image, no matter how many times I tried to remake it. Therefore, it remains a sketch. Since that previous image never felt quite finished, I returned to the space of the corner in fall of 2021. This iteration of working in the corner references my view of home, of personal memories of my great-grandma's living room, and so many homes in Northwest Alaska through the layout of the works. I've been thinking about how many photographs of loved ones were displayed on the walls of elders' homes in Alaska. Frames of all sizes graced the walls featuring kin. Portraits were layered through small acts of safekeeping by tucking the frameless photograph into the corners of the frame where the glass and the wood met. This work in progress is inspired by those modest yet significant gestures of keeping loved ones close, as I remembered from childhood. I have obscured some of the faces in the archival images as an act of protection, similar to my other work. This idea of activating the corner and it being a site of coming together is of interest to me. It's a space I have been thinking about since 2019. The corner can also reference a triangle, which is another coded visual language found in our tattooing. At the time of making this, I was still navigating this mode of working and what this piece would become, or what works this mode of production can and will transform into. I found a solution, which is a sculpture piece I made in 2022 out of my late great-grandma's handwriting, which was part of my MFA thesis exhibition, Where the Tundra Meets the Ocean. Before I get to talking about where the tundra meets the ocean, I want to talk about this picture. This image has been an important reference point for me in my current art practice. My great-grandma's fancy fur parka, found in our family photographs, contains layers of information beyond a simple and uninformed read of the garment. Our Inupiaq clothing includes signals and information about the wearer through pattern, cut, and abstract designs that silently communicate who they are, their gender, and what community they are of. Today, these designs remind us of who we come from. Our clothing is tied to place. And our clothing has also been used for protection from the harsh climate we come from. I see this notion of protection showing up in my work in the form of refusal. To refuse is to exercise extraordinary power. I do this because, as an Inupiaq person, many of our stories have been told by people outside of our communities, which can be dangerous. In that process, our stories have become disconnected from us and do not represent me. They exist as stereotypes and often remain in the past. I've been thinking about the power I hold as an artist, especially when photo-based works are created, and how much information I choose to give the viewer and how much I choose to keep for myself. And I'm thinking about how the refusal of information can, when I feel it is necessary, protect the person or non-human kin being photographed or visualized. When employed, this strategy can enact a form of tension. It requires a close read of the work. Ultimately, who has access to all of the information, and what does the refusal do to the viewer? Does it cause discomfort or curiosity? During the same time of making this video, I was reading work by Deborah Bird and thinking about Indigenous refusal. As Deborah Bird has highlighted, and I quote, "To get in the way of settler colonization, all the Native person has to do is stay home," end of quote. What I learned from Bird and other Indigenous scholars is that Indigenous peoples, and specifically queer Indigenous folks, are a threat to the empire simply through our existence. This threat is found within our refusal of the US empire's queerphobic, transphobic, and patriarchal principles. Standing our ground and taking up space as Indigenous peoples gets in the way of settler colonialism and is Indigenous refusal. Indigenous refusal has become an important theory to my work. Here's another example of refusal being exhibited. In Self-Portrait Legs 2020, I've directed the focus of my lens onto myself again. This self-portrait is about queerness and my identity as a whole. While making this image, I was thinking about the following. What does it mean to be feminine? What does it mean to be masculine? What about a little bit of both? Who gets to decide? This piece utilizes deadpan humor and pokes fun of the pervasive standards of mainstream American culture, cleanliness and beauty, and the dangers of a gender binary, and made up rules around who should and should not shave their legs. Untitled 2020, After Hal Fisher, is a standalone piece from a stage in my practice where I began to experiment with language in a new way to me through the inclusion of handwritten text. This photograph is also a way to celebrate the closed practice of Inuit tattooing, the artists found back home who have given me these tattoos, and the artists who have made the pieces of jewelry that I choose to adorn myself with. Great, you can read it. The pandemic hit the second semester of grad school, and so in April of 2021, I was finally able to go back home for the first time since leaving in 2019. And I got to visit my mom and my auntie. During that visit, I made images of my auntie and my mom's scars from her chemotherapy port, scans of the port, and began to think more about my family's archive and how those images from the past act as portals and connect me to my kin who have passed through space and time. I'm still figuring out this work specifically that's beginning to tell the story of my mom's cancer battle. I've been looking through the archives and have also been reading a lot of my late great-grandpa's journal entries about his own cancer battle and his loss of life from cancer. I think it's an important story to place in this ever-growing archive I'm adding to with my work for future Inupiaq to look at. I haven't touched it in a while, but I feel as if it fits within the work I'm making now, It is a chapter of work about family. This brings me to my MFA thesis work at the University of New Mexico in the spring of 2020. Where the Tundra Meets the Ocean renders family through photographs and the reactivation of familial archival images and documents. This work centers on Inupiaq and queer quiet moments and memories. An intergenerational dialogue between myself, family members, and those who have passed. This work features the strong women in my life, soft moments found at home with my partner, and the spaces and memories where I find comfort. These photographs help me keep those in my family who have passed alive and my kin nearby. Moments highlighted in Where the Tundra Meets the Ocean, such as in this photograph, Tea with Aka, Remembering Her, presents a conversation I'm having with my late great-grandma over tea. The photograph features her teacup and saucer, mailed to me by a family friend from our fish camp. Through objects such as the teacup and by including myself through the shadow of the hand, this story serves as an act of remembering her. This process allows me to keep her close to me and not forgotten. In my art practice, I have been asking myself, how do I keep someone alive who has passed on, and how do I make contemporary pictures of them? Working with my family archive and building my personal archive is a form of visual remembrance and directly links the past to the future. It's a way for me to share traces of family legacies. Inupiaq use oral storytelling to impart knowledge, share lessons, and keep one another alive. Native feminism also teaches us that storytelling and the act of remembering can serve as methods to keep people who no longer exist in this realm alive. My work aligns with these concepts. In this image, my mom holds an archival photograph that features my late Aka and my late Grammy. Technically, the term Aka means grandma in our language, but my mom was raised by my late great-grandparents, therefore I call her Aka. This image is about generational strength, love, and Indigenous joy. Again, I wanted to include important family members who have passed on in this work. For the past 10 years plus, I've had so many questions I've wanted to ask my late great-grandma and my late grandma. The color palette in this work relates to home, to Northwest Alaska. While a good portion of these images were made in New Mexico and beyond, there were a number made in Alaska as well. The pandemic kept me from returning home as much as I would have liked, but I found it a really good challenge to make work about home while being away. The sometimes soft light renders the subject matter in a similar quality of light that would be found back home in Alaska during the winter months. The energetic light in others could be found on a summer day where the midnight sun shines intensely. Where the Tundra Meets the Ocean contains whispers of kinship, which ask the viewer to slow down to engage with the stillness in the photographs. This relates to Inupiaq concepts of time, observation as a key learning method, and the value of patience in my culture. This piece is a scan of an archival family photograph with my Aka's handwritten note. This image speaks to love, care, and to what is not only inside of the frame, but what is also outside of the frame. While reading this note, I felt the love my late great-grandparents shared for each other. I felt sadness, but above all, I felt a connection to them more through this note than what was on the reverse side. I've been thinking about access and the access one has to information, to histories, to stories in my work. And I've been thinking about the unseen in this piece. This note can have multiple reads. I feel the sense of love and pride. Willie, a skilled hunter and provider, presented his wife Helen with a new fur. Helen was a skilled skin sewer and seamstress. This wolverine was most likely turned into the sunshine ruff on her fancy fur parka, found in the archival photographs. Sunshine ruffs are a staple in Inupiaq parka making. This reading of mine differs from even a read I had by another person who could only focus on the word killed. This piece is about tender love, and those who come from my community will recognize that. Where the tundra meets the ocean is a space that I had been thinking about in my practice, especially since the pandemic started during grad school and returning home was more difficult. It's a place I was traveling to through my work and family archival photographs and documents. Back then I began to understand that it was always there with me because I am made of home. The following slides contain documentation photographs of a sequence of where the tundra meets the ocean, which exhibited at the John Summers Gallery in Albuquerque in April of 2022. I chose to print my photographs large for this show because I want my work to take up space, to center Inupiaq and queer stories. Each of the 4 large 48 by 32 inch images contain one small hand-drawn unique design that is relevant to my culture. These abstract designs are simple at first glance, yet contains layers of information that are thousands of years old. Our Inupiaq ancestors adorned almost everything they made, from clothing to hunting devices, with designs, including our Inuit tattooing. Again, those abstract designs silently communicate who and where someone comes from. Our designs can also mark important milestones in one's life. I wanted to make my own frames from scratch so that I could etch hand-drawn designs into the frames using a CNC router as an act of protection, adornment, and for the visual symbols to act as a small gift to those who look. This piece came to life from me continuing to think about the space of the corner, which I referred to earlier in this talk, of language and how to reclaim that space that I was originally looking at as a space of language loss. Here, my great-grandma's handwriting and note detail from 1989 activates the corner. Her story continues with me in my work, and those who are connected to her. To me, the sheet metal references the graphite of the pencil she used to originally write down this story with. The interconnectedness of the photographs I have made and the reactivation of the family archive thread us together visually and presents closeness in a larger conversation I'm having with my loved ones. This work also highlights intergenerational sharing of knowledge, of history, of identity. I also made this photo book, which contains the larger sequence of this work to accompany my thesis exhibition. The photo book contains 38 photographs and contains 78 pages total and is 10.5 by 8 inches. An edition of 75 were printed in 2022. Now moving on to work made in 2023. How to Skip a Rock is a visual poem about relations and the magic found within queerness that is both tender and active. Within these cyclical connections are imagination, admiration, and the sharing of knowledge. The title, How to Skip a Rock, comes from this idea of playfulness and learning from each other that can be found in queer friendships. I was thinking about the fluidity of water and queerness, and how when a rock is skipped in the water, it forms cyclical patterns in the water that spread out, which reminds me of the sharing of knowledge in my queer friendships. I was also thinking about the softness and the hardness of being queer. The full sequence of this work can be found on my website. Salmon is vital to Indigenous cultures in Alaska. This piece relates to place and relations and is a photographic small-scale sculpture using the cyanotype photographic process to print on salmon skin. Untitled, as I have yet to come up with a clever name, as I typically like to do, to serve as an entry point for my viewers, features a portrait I made of my dear friend Quinn, who is Inupiaq in Otna. We both come from cultures where salmon is respected and has sustained our ancestors for generations. The sewing needles are also a nod to my late great-grandma and late grandma, who were both skin sewers. This is the same piece, but a wider picture to show the entire custom-made light box, which backlights the salmon skin. This diptych, called How Do We Tell Stories of Place When That Place Is Gone, after Typhoon Merbok, reflects on my family's connection to our fish camp just outside of Nome. This area is a significant place to my family and other Inupiaq families who also started their fish camps here. This was the last physical place in our family that connected me to my late great-grandparents. Not only did Typhoon Merbok in the Bering Sea sweep away our aging fish camp, but it also changed the composition of our native allotment land. What was once, to me, a significant amount of land and beach, where my family brought in their fish nets, prepared traditional foods for the winter, where I played as a child, and where we shared stories over a campfire, is now only a small area of beach. The erosion caused by climate change and the storms over the years erased our land. Climate change is altering places we as Indigenous peoples once knew as being part of us and our ways of life. So how do we tell stories of place when that place is gone? Here's a detail of the archival family photo that I have remixed through the inclusion of the lilac flowers while thinking about Indigenous refusal and the tension in what is revealed and what is concealed. This is another act of protection. I'm expanding this work, which includes time in public and private archives, and have made trips back home to Nome to make photos to tell the story of place and portraits of those who this space means so much to. This brings me to the expansion of making this work about fish camp. I'm grateful to have received a grant this past spring, which allowed me to return home to Nome to make this work on this sand together. I will show a larger edit here, and you will see a condensed exhibition edit at GOCA, which opens tomorrow. Surrounded by the Bering Sea and the Nome River is a small spit of land. This area holds stories of people and place. During the summer months, you can hear the ocean waves, Arctic terns, and seagulls. On those quiet days when the salmon are running, you can hear the splash of the fish. Throughout the years, this area has been loved by the people who call this spot Fish Camp, and it has been shaped by the waters and the storms that remind us of their power. Fort Davis, or Fort, or as some call it in Inupiaq, Inupiaq, is a place my family and other Inupiaq families have cherished. As I look to the ocean side of Inupiaq, the spot approximately where my family's fish camp used to be, I saw nothing but driftwood. There was no more beach grass, no pale gray camp. On that sand, together we searched. Our camps were gone and much of the land eroded. What was once a plentiful land was now beach. Due to the intense storms and loss of land, my family cannot rebuild on this location. Since then, as I had previously mentioned, I've been asking myself, how do we tell stories of place when that place is gone? How do we, as Indigenous peoples, share stories so that future generations will know the significance of this place? Indigenous peoples understand place as being part of us. When climate change impacts and even erases those places we know of as being part of us and being kin, where do we go from there? With this work, I tell a portion of the story of Inupiaq. Inupiaq will always remain part of my family. Inupiaq is located about 3 miles from my hometown of Nome, Alaska, also known as Sitŋasuaq in the Inupiaq language. Inupiaq is where my late great-grandparents set up their modest one-room subsistence fish camp after moving from their home village of Kinnigan, or Wales, Alaska in the early 1950s. This place was rooted in community. It was where Inupiaq ways of being were passed down from one generation to the next. It is where my great-grandparents set their fish nets, where my family processed traditional foods, and where they worked with other families to process these foods as well. It is where children played together. It's where familial bonds were created. I grew up going to our fish camp, And with each generation, the space changed and how it was used changed too. But what always remained was that our family's small plot of land and the aged and weathered fish camp was always connected me to my late great-grandparents. There I could be with them. As I had mentioned, in September of 2022, Typhoon Merbok ripped through the coastline of Northwest Alaska and transformed Inupiaq, sweeping away our aging fish camp. The land that we held dear was eroded and forever changed. Not long after the storm, I drove down the bumpy dirt road to Inupiaq with a family friend named Josie. Josie's maternal family roots are from Kinnigan as well, and she was also my third grade teacher. I was shocked as to what I saw. This was not the Fort Davis I once knew. As we drove slowly down the road, Josie pointed out other family camps that were lost to the ocean or severely destroyed, remembering each family name and sharing a few memories of her time growing up at Fort. Josie's truck came to a stop. We were at the new end of the road, decided by the waves and the wind. We were met by her sister Mary. And there we searched again. These pictures were made during summer months when Fort Davis would be most busy. It would also be the time when our family and other families would be at fish camp, when that midnight sun shines. During my visits there to make this work, I'd never seen it so quiet during the summer months. Thank you. Thanks for